up the meeting, assuming everyone can hear me. Welcome to our second online presentation of AMC Maine Chapter. Tonight, we have the pleasure of welcoming Denise Fredette, who is going to share about her paddling adventure last summer on the Allagash River. She's actually a cyclist and a hiker, so this was a new experience for her to go outside her comfort zone, as she shared in her article in Wilderness Matters. But she was able to have a new experience, and we're all eager to hear about it. So I'd like to welcome Denise. And Denise, if you want to take over and share the screen, that would be great.
Thank you, Denise. Let me just see if I can get the right screen. Okay.
Great.
All right. And thank you, Denise, for organizing this. I'm going to talk about our trip that we took the end of July, early August last summer, canoeing the Allagash. And just a little bit about me. I'm a 4-season hiker, and I also do some backpacking. And I have a core group of friends, and we go out on do a lot of hiking and backpacking. But most of the people on this trip do not have much paddling experience, particularly in canoes. So this was just something new. I was a little nervous before embarking on this, but originally it was also devised as a way to include some of our significant others who are not hikers, sort of as a gentler trip. So I'm just going to talk about, how this trip happened and some of the things that we did on it. And it's also subtitled Exercise and Relationship Communication. So how did this happen? As most of our adventures and our plans happen, it was during a hiking trip. I actually wasn't even on the hiking trip that where somebody said, "Oh, I want to do the Allagash," and other people agreed. This was actually over here, Franconia Ridge, my friends Katie, Molly, and Sarah, and they were talking about it. And this is a picture of us backpacking in the Adirondacks. These are some of the people that were on the canoe trip, and us last fall in the Northern Prezzies. So we're very much land people for the most part. So after this hike where they thought about doing the Allagash, Molly sent out an email to everyone, our group of hiker friends, and asked who was interested. So it ended up being about 8 people who responded and said they were interested. So now we had to come up with what the plan would be. There were a lot of emails, especially in the last month, but we had to decide how long we wanted to be out there. What were the outfitters available? What was the camping situation like on the Allagash? What were some of the challenges that we might face that we would have to think about? Packing, what were we going to bring? These were all sort of things that, because we had not been in this area before, that we had to think about. So we got a lot of Allagash Wilderness Waterways maps. We researched outfitters. We ended up going with Tyler Kelly Camps up in Fort Kent, and yeah, and just talking to them and finding out that they only shuttle one group per day because it takes pretty much a day to go and drop people off and come back, and it would take 3 hours for us to get to our put-in point. We decided on 4 days and 3 nights just because of everyone's schedules. And we knew that there were plenty of campsites along the Allagash, just sort of spread out, that were first come, first serve. So we knew these things, and we knew that there would be rapids. This was something that did make me pretty nervous, going over rapids in a canoe, just being unsure at the time. So we did a lot of route planning. This is a group that is very good at planning trips. So this was actually kind of fun. And we decided to put in at Umsaskis Dam, which is right around there. And we would paddle up and put out in the town of Allagash, which is basically where Tyler Kelly Camp, the outfitter, was based. So we ended up coming out right across the street from where our cars were. So that was pretty convenient. And in the last month, we sent a lot more emails. We had Zoom meetings, trying to figure out how we were going to make this work. We had people coming from Maine, Massachusetts, and I even had a friend coming up from Virginia. She ended up coming to my house in Raymond, and we carpooled up there. And for me, being in Maine, it was still almost a 6-hour drive. So we came up the night before. The outfitter had cabins for rent, but they also offered free camping on their lawn. And we like free things and inexpensive things, so we opted for that. So we all drove up the day before, got there in the early evening, and the forecast was for torrential rains, steady rains all night long. And when we got out into the field, there were a lot of black flies. It was the most that we saw the whole trip, but they were there. So we opted to all sleep in our cars, which was not very comfortable, but it did the job. We stayed dry. And the next morning, we pulled all of our gear out and we organized it. And there's a restaurant that's right next door to the outfitters. It's actually owned by the sister-in-law of the people who own the outfitters. So it was pretty convenient. So we went over there. We had a really good breakfast. We got to watch the people coming in off the river, looking tired, and we got to ask them, about the campsites and about the conditions. So that was nice to have. And then after, we went over to the vans next door and we started loading our gear up. Wade, who owns the Tyler Kelly camps, would be driving us to the put-in point. So we got in, and as I said before, it was about a 3-hour drive and a lot of dirt, northern Maine roads. We had to stop at the North Maine Woods, the check-in gate to register and pay for our camping for the nights that we were going to be on the river. While we were driving there, Wade asked us what we do when we're not going on a canoe trip. And we told him that we hike and backpack, and he laughed and he said, I guessed that right away. And we asked why. He's like, because most people who come on these trips are not so efficient in their packing. They're bringing way more stuff and it's just all over the place. So we thought that was funny just because we are very aware of what we're bringing on trips, because most of the time when we're backpacking, we're thinking lightweight and compact and not bringing too much. And for us, being able to put everything in a canoe was a luxury. We actually did bring a little bit more than we would otherwise have brought because it was great. We didn't have to carry on our backs. So that was pretty nice. So here we are. This is up around Umsaskis Dam put in. We had to wait for a group coming off of the water. So we were there probably 45 minutes before we actually got to unload our canoes and pack up. And our idea was to rotate partners throughout this trip. We ended up with 7 people because somebody at the last minute had to back out. But my first partner would be my husband, and we were all trying to fit everything in the canoes. And he suggested that I take the rear and he take the front. And I told him I've never been in the back of a canoe. I'd only been in the front. And generally, when you're in the back of a canoe, you're the person who's steering. And I told him, you don't even like how I drive. I'm not sure this is such a good idea. But I did it. So we got out there and we kind of went in circles. We seemed to be working against each other a little bit. And I found out that your voice carries on lakes. So we went in circles. We were just trying to figure it out. And everybody else finally got on the water. And we were sort of in a lake. We weren't quite in the river yet. And it was windy and choppy. And I was very nervous. But we started moving. not really in a straight line. We were just sort of all over the place, just trying to go in one direction. But, we paddled for probably a couple of hours. And then we saw a vacant campsite on the side. It wasn't the one that we were going to stop at for the evening because we still had a few more hours of paddling, but we were tired. We hadn't eaten lunch yet. So we pulled over and we had some lunch, and I sort of, gathered myself. My husband and I decided to switch places, and he would go in the back and I would go in the front. After lunch, we pushed our canoes out and the kayak out, and we got back in, and we were still having some issues. We had one person on this trip who knew what he was doing. He had, been in a canoe. He knew how to canoe paddle. So he gave us pointers, and we all listened because all of us, except for him, didn't quite feel confident in what we were doing. So he gave us some paddling stroke techniques to use, and it was smoother after that. I was very happy that he was on this trip to sort of give us those pointers. So we continued on for a few more hours, and it wasn't as bad. And then up ahead, I didn't know if they were rapids or if they were the first portage of the trip, but it did not look like something we wanted to take canoes on. So we pulled over to the shore. I pulled the canoe up, and I got out and walked up the hill to see where we were. And I was very happy to see that we were at Long Lake Dam. So this was what I did not want to go over, and this was our first portage. It was also where we decided to set up camp for the night, so we could pull up our canoes, all of our gear, and the next morning we'd just pull it back down on the other side. This was one of our shorter portages. So once we got everything set up, all of our tents set up, we went for a swim. A swim would become what we did, every night when we get to camp. It was really nice to be able to do that. And we had happy hour and we had dinner. And these shirts, my girlfriends and I bought these shirts after a backpacking trip in the Adirondacks. It was just sort of like a drink koozie slogan that we saw, and we decided that every time that we would do something that was very type 2 fun, we would wear these, or something that was very challenging to us, we would wear these and take pictures. So that's us just sort of posing. And because of the torrential downpours, we tried to get a fire going, and we did for a little bit, but the first couple of nights, having a fire was a little bit more challenging because the wood was just very wet. So we had a nice night at Long Lake Dam campsite. And then the next morning, we pulled our canoes out, we loaded them up. I decided to take the kayak this time, so everybody switched partners, and I felt much more comfortable in the kayak, having one and going out on lakes. I just liked feeling lower to the ground and just more secure for me. However, we went through some rapids and there was shallow water. So every once in a while, I would go through something so shallow that I would get stuck on the rocks and have to rock myself back and forth to get off of those. So that was challenging, but I was developing more of a comfort in the water, each time we went through rapids, and just, getting better at paddling. And this day we were going to go through Round Pond, and there is a mountain on the other side of Round Pond called Round Mountain. It's 4 miles round trip. And I was excited about that, just to be on land for a little while and in my comfort zone. So we paddled for a few hours. We got to Round Pond, and it was choppier and windier, and we knew approximately where the trailhead was. So we were going to cut across the lake, but veer slightly to the right, and then sort of trail the shoreline, so to make sure that we didn't miss where the trail was. So we did that. And at first we thought maybe we had not gone far enough over, but eventually we came to it and pulled our canoes up onshore, and we grabbed our sneakers and we grabbed some water and snacks, and we headed up to Round Mountain. And this is my husband walking. It was a pretty moderate grade. It wasn't very steep. It was a nice hike in the woods. There wasn't much for views. At the top, there is a fire tower, and half of the group went up the fire tower. The other half sat at the picnic tables below. And I believe there's a road that goes to this as well. So I think it's accessible by land as well. And this was the view from the top of the fire tower. So that was a pretty nice little respite from the canoes. And then we came back down and we had lunch, and then we set off again, going through some more rapids. And every time we go through the rapids, we get a little bit better at communicating, rock on the left, straight ahead, giving directions to each other. And every once in a while on some of these rapids during this trip, somebody would get stuck on a rock, and just, making sure that somebody was available to help them if they needed it. But even if we got a little bit stuck, there wasn't the panic that I felt in the beginning. We were getting better at just realizing, this is what happens, and we need to maneuver this way or that way and work together to get, out of that. So it actually became a little bit fun. And so this night we ended up at Five Finger South campsite. This campsite I didn't love as much as the other ones. It was the ground was not as even and flat. So I was sleeping at a bit of an incline. But it was nice to be on land, and we tried to start the fire. It didn't last very long because it was still wet. We had gone through some showers that day. So, but we also had, they have all these things to put tarps up. So that was nice, just in case it did rain while we were at camp. This is me and my husband pulling up because we had switched places again. And this is, me taking a selfie, and we were taking so many pictures. I wish I had taken more, but a lot of my friends took way more, just because it was so beautiful out there and so peaceful. It was different than hiking in the mountains. And it was wonderful and lovely. The next day, the third day, we got up earlier than we had the other days, because this was going to be our longer day, and we had a longer portage today. So, we also wanted to see moose. We were scanning for moose and we didn't see any, although a group in front of us did see a moose, but by the time we got there, it had gone off. So this is us pushing off in the morning. And there was sort of like a mist on the water, and it was so nice. So after paddling for a while for the morning, we got to the Allagash Falls portage. So this portage is almost a mile long. It's 3/4 of a mile. And we had to go up sort of a steep embankment. You'll see we took everything out of the canoes and the kayak and put it on the flats above, and then we each pulled these canoes and the kayaks. It was a lot of work. It took a while. And one of my friends, Frank, told us about yoking, and my husband decided to try yoking the canoe. He carried this canoe that must have been at least 80 pounds the entire way. He did not set it down once. So he felt that a few days later. But nobody else could carry it the entire length of time. So that was pretty cool. At the other side, we were hot and tired and hungry, and that had taken so long that we decided to swim. So we spent some time there just sort of swimming and having lunch, and it was so relaxing. I don't have a picture of the waterfall, Allagash Falls, which is over to the side, but it was just so nice and relaxing and beautiful. It was just a really nice day. So we did that, and then eventually we knew we had to pack up and go to our last camp site for the evening. And we knew that we had some more rapids to go through, so we packed up. And we continued on. We went through a whole bunch of rapids that we knew about. There were some class 2s and some, I think they call them RIPS, RIPS. There's just small rapids. And there were plenty of campsites that we passed. We wanted a specific campsite that would be closer to the end, just so that we would have a shorter day. And be out of the water by noon the next day. So we continued on, and there were a lot of campsites that we passed that were already had people on them. So we kept scanning the shore. We knew what we were looking for was on the left-hand side, and we passed all these landmarks, and we were just like, did we pass it? Did we somehow miss it? Where is it? And so we continued on, and then on the right-hand side, my friend who has eagle eyes, he's like, there's a campsite right there. And we were tired by then. This was our longest day, and it was a little bit later than we usually get to the campsite. So we pulled up to Twin Brook South. Twin Brook South was not on the map. So we were a little bit confused. We climbed up there to the campsite, and it was large and it was flat and it looked brand new. And we'd find out later there was actually a Maine forest guide who joined us. He came solo and told us that this was a brand new campsite, and the campsite that we were going to go to no longer exists. So it was a good thing that we stopped when we did, or we might have been out of luck with campsites. We might have ended up back at the cars earlier. So when our friend, the warden, the Maine guide came, Sarah moved her tent. So this is her carrying the tent to a new area so that we wouldn't disturb him. And this is the privy that I was very impressed with. It's always nice to see a newly built, clean outhouse. It's the little things that make things nicer. So I had to take a picture of the privy. And this is us on our last night on the Allagash. We had just gone for a swim. This particular area, the current was really fast. I had to hold on to a rock, or I would not have been able to stay in place. But it was still nice. We played games and, shared appetizers. And it was just this was probably my favorite camp spot. And this is us just sort of with the canoes and things, happy to be on land for a little bit. And this is also another picture of this campsite because I just liked it. They, whoever built this also made little chairs out of the wood stumps, which I thought was pretty clever. So there was already chairs in the spot. So the fourth day, this is the view from my tent, sort of the sunrise, which was really nice. And here is us pushing off, and we had some more rapids to go through before the end of the day. This was probably at least a 4 hours that we were on before we actually got off of the river. And it was just amazing how different it was from when we began. When we started this trip, we were nervous. We didn't really know what we were doing, most of us. I was so worried that the canoe and everything in it would tip over somehow going through rapids, and everything that we brought would be soaking wet and it wouldn't be fun. But we learned how to communicate. We learned how to go over rapids and canoes, and knowing that we were going to be fine and things were most likely not going to tip over. And, it was a lot of fun and just such a different experience that I highly recommend trying. And it was nice to go outside of our comfort zones. And this is us in the weeds, and this was like a sandbar that we stopped at because by then we didn't really want it to end, and we weren't that far from where we would end up at the end of the day. So this is us all smiling and happy, just trying to enjoy the rest of the trip. And this became the beginning of a new tradition. So we're now planning to paddle the St. Croix this summer. And we'll take turns. Last year, I made most of the reservations. This year, somebody else is going to do it. But it's something that we can include other people who might not be quite as, like doing all the hiking things that we do. And it was just so much fun. So that is basically it in a nutshell. So I don't know if people want to ask questions.
Yes, I will look. We have a chat function, which I will look for questions. And I'll look at those, but I also wanted to just ask a couple questions myself while the other questions are coming in. How are the bugs at night, like at that dusk and dawn hour?
You know what? Surprisingly, they were not that bad. I was surprised because when we were at the outfitter, before we got on the water, that was the buggiest it was in the whole 4 days. I'm sure in the end of June, beginning of July, it's probably worse, but it wasn't bad at all. There was always a nice breeze. So I didn't notice the bugs except when we were at the very beginning.
So we do have a question. Sheila's asking, what will you do differently next time?
What would I do differently? I'd rather not be in the back of the canoe. I think I'd feel differently. Having this experience gave me more of a comfort level. I think like packing wise, I brought an umbrella. I would still do that because it did shower on us. We're a very prepared group. So, we had water filters, we had tents, we had tarps. We had the food that we needed. I'm not sure if there would be anything that I would do differently. Even the portages were not as bad as I thought that they would be. So maybe get up earlier to see if we can see some more wildlife and be quieter.
Yes, and I'm also just wondering, Carolyn's asking if you have a packing list that you could share.
Yes, I do have a packing list. I can send it out. I'm not sure how to share it, but if there's an attendee list, I can send it out.
Okay, we can work on that.
Yep.
And then Ron is asking, would you consider getting a guide for this, or how did you feel without one?
We felt fine for this. I mean, we had the outfitter who was able to answer all of our questions, and as far as being in the outdoors, we feel very competent about that. And the Allagash is so well marked as far as like where the campsites are. And we just did our research before we went. I would think if somebody had less experience in the outdoors or reading maps, I would recommend getting a guide or with packing. But just for our particular group, we were pretty good at just researching as much as we could. And asking our outfitter, local questions. And there are a lot of good resources about this area online.
And Paul is asking, what month did you go and what were the water temperatures?
We went at the end of July, beginning of August. So like it was probably more the first week of August. And I'm not sure, the water temperatures were probably 60 or 64. They were not bad. It was comfortable. It wasn't ice cold. So, if you're comfortable in cooler water, yeah, it wasn't too bad at all.
And then Dawn is asking, comparing paddling a canoe to a kayak, did you have a preference, or in terms of storing gear, was there a difference between using a canoe or a kayak?
Well, the difference, I feel more comfortable generally in a kayak just because sitting lower, I feel like my center of gravity and my balance is better. However, a canoe has much more room for storing gear. I've done a one night in a kayak before, and you really have to get much more creative. There's not as much storage in most kayaks
Okay.
compared to a canoe.
And Sheila's asking, did you see your moose? Did you get to see moose?
Not on this trip. That's why hopefully, like, I would change, like, either getting up earlier or going out at night, because that dawn and dusk, trying to see it and trying to be as quiet as possible. But no, hopefully next time.
Yeah. She's also asking about contact with the outfitter. We'll have to figure out how we can get your information to the list here. So
Yeah.
I'll make a note of that.
And I should say also, there is no cell reception whatsoever anywhere. The entire trip there, you're completely unplugged.
Yeah, but just the name again of that is Taylor Camps?
It's Tyler Kelly Camps, Tylor.
Okay, so if somebody Googles that, they can start looking for that.
Yep, the name is right here.
Okay.
Oh, wait, can you still see my?
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
you can.
Yeah. Tyler Kelly Camps, Tylor.
Yeah.
Kelly Camps in Allagash, Maine. I think.
And they were really good too. They were really nice and very knowledgeable about the area.
Yeah, I think they would be a good resource. So someone was asking about maps.
Yeah.
They wanted to know if you could display them, or is there a map that represents the overall stretch of the Allagassen state? I think you can see it on a Delorme map.
Yes, I believe you can. I got the I believe it's like the National Geographic, I just bought maps north and south. They were split up, and a few of us had different maps. One of my friends, her son had gone on a similar trip, so she had maps from that. But yeah, I think they were like the National Geographic maps that I bought, and they were split up into north and south because we only needed a short section of this. I think because the whole of the Allagash is 92.5 miles. We only did about probably close to 35 miles or so of that.
Okay. I was, Carolyn's asking, and I was wondering myself, would you have made it a longer trip, more than 3 nights and 4 days?
I would the next time. So, what part of it was just work and just trying to get our schedules. I was also, being so new to this, I wanted it to be shorter because I wasn't quite sure how much I would like it. So I think if it's brand new to you, for me anyway, trying something out for a shorter period of time is a good thing, just to see if it's something that you would want to do for longer. And I would totally go for longer now that I've done this. So I'm glad for the experience.
I think to kayak or paddle the entire Allagash is 1 to 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, it's quite lengthy.
Yeah.
Marion is wondering, what did the outfitter charge for transporting you to the starting point?
Oh gosh. I have that information actually. But I'm not, I think it was like 800 and something for 8 people, and including rentals, canoe rentals. Because we rented 3 canoes, 1 kayak, and it was a 3-hour ride for 8 people, and I think it was about 800 and something.
No, divided by 8.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Kazuma wants to know if you carried a GPS. Would you have needed a GPS?
I don't think that we would have for this. We all have, I have an InReach, and I have a GPS on my phone, but it was so well marked, and we passed, like, I think it was Forest Service on the side on our last day. There were people that, like Forest Service people that were out on the water if we did get in trouble, but everything seemed like it was so well marked. We knew where we were, as long as you can read a map. Otherwise, a GPS, if you have sort of like a marine GPS, meant for the area, that might be helpful. But if being able to look at the map and know where you are and what to look for was
Yeah, it
enough for
seems
us.
your first slide showed you on a lake, but it was pretty clear once you crossed the lake that there was just one exit to the river.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was once you were on the river, it was just one lane all the way. Is that
Yes. Yes. There were only a couple of spots along the river where it sort of branched because it had an island. And we got pretty good at knowing which way was the right way. Because the more narrow way usually ended up being beached on rocks. We learned that just from going through it. So every once in a while, things would branch off and then they'd come back together. And we realized, the wider entrance is usually the best one. But that was just a few times on the trip. But if you're pretty much going in one direction, and we looked at the map. So like Round Pond, we were on the river, and then we got to Round Pond, and we knew there was only one way to go out of that to resume on the river. So we knew where that was, and we aimed for that.
And then Paul is asking, were there any people fishing?
Yes. My husband tried to fish. He's a big fisherman. So he brought his fishing poles. I didn't see too many other people, but he tried fishing, but ended up mostly doing it from shore because the current was so fast that he had to pay attention to help paddling. So I didn't really see too many other people just fishing aside from him.
And then I think you might have answered this question, but you wouldn't use a guide next time. You felt fine without a guide.
I did, but that's just, I think, a product of our experience reading maps and being able to navigate. But I would recommend that for somebody who might have less experience or want more, help, planning and going to the right places.
And did you ever worry about not finding your campsite?
Yes. Well, my worry was because it's first come, first served that they would all be taken. But the first 2 days, that wasn't an issue. And they were so plentiful that we were able to get the campsites that we were wanted. And we passed a few that were vacant that we could have gone to. But the last day, I was nervous because we had passed landmarks and it was supposed to be there. But what we didn't know was that they had built a new campsite, and the one that we were looking for wasn't available anymore to be on anyway. So that was the only day. I was a little bit nervous that we would pass that because it's hard to paddle upstream.
Oh, okay. So you had a map and you had chosen ahead of time where you wanted to camp each night.
Yes. And we had chosen multiple options. So if we didn't know how fast we would be able to go. So we had several options. And if we were making really good time, we would go to the one further away. And it really worked out pretty well that way. We went at a pretty good pace because the current was just so good, plus our paddling and the rapids made it a little bit speedier.
Okay, I think I got through all the questions. This was really great. Thanks for sharing this. I really appreciate your sense of adventure and taking on a new activity, kind of get into our comfort zone, but you sort of decided to go beyond that. And you've started a new tradition. You're going to be paddling this summer again.
I know. I'm very looking. I'm sorry.
Where is the St. Croix?
It's up in sort of it's far northern Maine. It's sort of on the Maine Canadian border, northeast. So it'll be up there.
Yeah.
I had to look it up myself. One of my friends who was on this trip, it's her turn to plan this. So I asked her, so what is the address that we will be aiming for? Oh yes, it's another 6-hour drive, but that's okay. It's so beautiful up there, and it's so remote and It's just like another world. So I highly recommend taking the trip. And I'm glad that we got outside of our comfort zones. It was amazing how, how we started out so nervous and, a little scared about just doing this new thing, and then how much more comfortable after 4 days that we got with everything.
Great, great. All right. Well, thank you, Denise. This has been really enjoyable. I think you can take down your screen so that my picture comes. Yep, there we are. Great. So thanks again. And I just wanted to say to the attendees that we have our first inpatient, I'm actually not at work, I shouldn't say that. We have our in-person presentation in Brunswick at the Curtis Memorial Library, April 4th. And our speaker will be Kerry Kish. Some of you may know him. He's written several books about hiking and adventures in Maine. And he will be sharing his latest book, which is about hiking in New England with a bear destination at the end of each hike. I don't know if anyone of you know Kerry, but I know him from hiking the Appalachian Trail. It's actually where I met him many years ago. And his trail name is Bear Man. So he is the expert on this. And it will be our first in-person presentation. So please check your Meetup advertisements for this, and that's a Thursday night. We will also try very hard. I'm hoping that we can make it a hybrid meeting and that it will also have a Zoom link. So for those that are too far to travel or can't travel, that they can watch this presentation online. So thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again, and especially April 4th. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you, Denise.